When Necromunda Hired Gun was announced, I was considerably hyped and really looked forward to play it. At face value, it looks like a Doom clone set in one of the outlawed controlled underhives on Necromunda, which is a promising setting. Necromunda is a very well known hive world in the Warhammer 40k universe, and having a Doom clone in a setting like Warhammer 40k felt like something that should have been done way sooner. I was especially looking forward to play this game after my time with Adeptus Titanicus Dominus, another Warhammer 40k game that showed some good potential. However, it got pushed out the door of early access too quickly and left me pretty disappointed. So while I was considerably hyped for Necromunda Hired Gun, I kept my expectations and hopes to the lower side of things. Despite that, I couldn't help myself at times and be excited to play a new Warhammer 40k game. I really like the setting, and for a game it offers a lot of potential, and I hope Necromunda Hired Gun uses a part of that potential. The trailers looked promising, and it's developed by Streumon Studio, which also developed Space Hulk Deathwing, which was a pretty alright game, so you could say that they know their Warhammer 40k stuff. So there is a lot of potential and even a promising start, but it's no guarantee for success. So let's dive into the Underhive and see if Necromunda Hired Gun is a good game. In Necromunda Hired Gun, you play as, well, a hired gun, working together with Cal Jericho trying to get revenge on the Silver Talon, who is an infamous bounty hunter that killed your friends. On this adventure you fight countless of outlaws and gangs to get a step closer to your revenge, but also to make some good money on the side. But living this life on the hive world of Necromunda makes you more enemies than friends, and even those whom you call your friends might one day turn against you. Necromunda Hired Gun lured me in simply by the fact that it takes place in a hive city. Now, what is a hive city? Well, it's very simple but a little bit insane. A hive city is a huge urban arcology that reaches for miles up in the sky and houses easily billions of people. And as is tradition for such buildings, the higher you live in the hive city, the better your life is, and the lower you live, the worse it gets. And that is basically the explanation of what is a hive city. Of course there's a lot more to it as it's Warhammer 40k, but I'm not a lore channel, so I'm trying to keep it very, very simple here. The game itself takes place in the Underhive, which is almost the lowest level and basically the ugly underbelly of every hive city. As the city grew over the decades, more and more layers of buildings were stacked on top of everything else. Therefore there are abandoned and even lost places in the Underhive, and it's just one big scrapyard, which is a paradise for gangs and outlaws. It makes for an overall very cool setting for a game like this. And while the setting of Necromunda was done before in other games, we never really got a chance to see and experience a hive city up close like this. The way to portray and experience a hive city up close is fun and interesting. They are immense structures, but to portray and experience them correctly, you must not focus on the city itself, but rather focus on the skill of a human. A hive city must feel big by you feeling really small, even insignificant and neglectable. While you do explore many different places in this game, you will never leave the Underhive and you actually stay relatively close to your hub location, which for a human feels like a huge chunk of the hive city, but in reality it's not. On one of the first story missions you actually really get a good idea of how big a hive city really is. You have to get on board of a freight train that is so big that it could easily be a small city by itself, which is absolutely insane, but also really cool. Yet the insane skill is not overwhelming because every location has a lot of details, making them look and feel different from one another. This brought some good balance in the game. Skill is an important factor when portraying a hive city, but it are details and atmosphere that does the actual trick. All these small details made every location stand out from one another and made the large scale even more noticeable. But most importantly, it created this almost perfect atmosphere that makes you feel small, insignificant and neglectable, which is how you should feel in a hive city. The atmosphere is definitely the best part of the game and is what I hoped it would be. Of course, the overall atmosphere is grimdark, but it also had a lot of tone switches, which was a surprise. For example, the hub world felt warm and actual safe, making coming back from adventures feel a bit like coming home. Even though the hub world is filled with lots of outlaw and scum. Manufactorums were very noisy and bright because of the countless of active machines and furnaces, while old and abandoned buildings were the complete opposite of that, as they felt cold, mysterious and even a bit scary. I absolutely loved the atmosphere in this game. It made every minute exploring and just being in the Underhive amazing, even though it was sometimes hard to enjoy it, as the FPS gameplay was sometimes very distracting. As I stated in the opening, at face value the game looks like a Doom clone, and well, it felt like Doom with the movement, music, how guns felt and the visual feedback when enemies get hit. But it also felt like Titanfall with the grappling hook, wall running and some of the abilities you can unlock. These elements by themselves are a lot of fun and can even be combined, but when I look at them all being combined here in Necromunda Hired Gun, I can't help myself but feel a bit confused and disappointed. For half of the game this mix of elements work really well, and then the gameplay is not only a lot of fun but also feels very satisfying. There's a clear nice flow between movement, shooting and the usage of abilities. But for the other half of the gameplay feels disconnected and unfitting. In these moments, this mix of elements almost seem to work against each other. Movement feels very restrictive and clunky, while shooting and the abilities feel very one-dimensional and grounded. The reason why is that the map design isn't always in favor of using all these elements alone or combined. Movement is one, if not the most important part of the combat. It is fast and you have a lot of options to create or close distances with your enemies. In the beginning you can only simply dodge and slide, while later on you get improved jumping, teleportation skills and a grappling hook. Having all these options is great, but again, sometimes the map just doesn't support them. Especially wall running was badly supported, as there was only a few moments where it would be possible and even useful. Dodging and sliding was a bit more consistent, however, dodging sometimes felt like a gamble. There are many details on the map in terms of clutter, and getting stuck on them happens quite easily. Jumping and the grappling hook were the most consistent options in terms of mobility. If you used the dodge in mid-air, you even avoided the getting stuck on clutter problem for most of the time. However, both of them are sometimes a bit buggy. Gunplay is across the board a lot better and more consistent throughout the game. Sound design is good and really packed a punch, and visual feedback of shooting and killing enemies is really satisfying at times. It's of course very brutal, which is what you should expect in a Warhammer 40k game. I especially love that some weapons have even specific style of gore when used. Plasma weapons will leave enemies scorched, while grenades and the heavy bolter will cleave right through basic enemies, ripping them apart, sending their limbs and intestines flying all over the place. And on top of that you got your abilities, which will do a combination of both. I have a small tiny personal nitpick on the bolter and heavy bolter. While the sound is alright, I would have much preferred it if they used the bolter and heavy bolter sound from the Warhammer 40k Space Marine game. In that game those guns sound just a little bit better and have a more impactful sound, but then again that's just a nitpick. I like the gunplay, and combined with the moment that movement works well with the map design, it's even very good. However, Necromunda Hired Gun doesn't have dedicated weapons. Instead, the game opts for a loot system, which works a bit confusing. You have multiple slots for weapons in your inventory, but can only use a couple of them in-game. Switching them on the fly from your inventory is impossible and must be done at specific moments in the game, which is something to get used to. In the beginning it was quite common that I forgot to swap out weapons or buy items before going into a mission, which meant I had to stop the mission, go back to the hub location to refill everything, only to start the mission again. It's not a big problem, it's something that you just have to get used to, but in the beginning it's a very big inconvenience. Also, I am not going to lie, I am not a fan of looter shooters, as the situation always occurs that I have to swap out a weapon I like using, For one that I don't like using only because the stats are better on that gun. Luckily they kept the loot table small and the gaps between the stats even smaller. Still, I would have preferred a dedicated weapon system where it's more important to manage your ammo and know which weapon is more useful against specific enemies or is the strongest in certain situations. The other problem that comes with it being a looter shooter is that some enemies have to be bullet sponges to create difficulty. Now, I don't want to be that guy that wants gameplay to reflect lore perfectly, but having an enemy walk away just fine after I blast a whole magazine of a heavy bolter in his face kinda broke the immersion of the world, as that type of gun is easily capable of blasting half of a human body into oblivion with a single round. Boss battles were the absolute worst, as you didn't even know how much damage you dealt to them and there was no gimmick nor tactic to take them down. It was just shooting them till they drop, which can take a while. For every other enemy you can luckily use the takedowns, which makes everything a lot easier, though maybe a bit too easy. The takedowns are cool, but they kinda ruin the game. It's the most obvious taken element from Doom, which is fine, though they slightly changed it. In Doom you have to stun your enemy to gloriously break open their skull and takedown. In Necromunda Hired Gun, you don't need to do that. No, you can just walk up to any enemy and just spam E for a takedown. During a takedown you are invincible and you even recover a bit of your health. The idea of recovering your health by dealing damage is a good one, as instead of seeking cover and hiding, you are forced to stay in the fight. But unfortunately, it's very easily exploited because you can do a takedown on everyone no matter what. The takedowns also became kind of annoying later in the game. Not only does the camera start to move very janky, which makes it hard to see what is happening, but some of these takedown animations take a good 5 to 8 seconds to complete. This takes the wind out of your sails completely, basically ruining a nice flow you had going in your kill spree. Yet sometimes using takedowns is forced onto you and is the most, if not only, effective way to fight. Which means abandoning movement and gunplay completely, which are the elements that are good and more enjoyable. They should definitely revisit the takedowns and take another look at how Doom did it, cause right now the takedowns really are harming the game experience. But I don't want to bash the takedowns too hard, as some of them are really cool and in certain situations they can make you even laugh, as they sometimes bug out in a very hilarious way. Like sometimes the animation is off center or even completely out of sync. Also, during a takedown you're not completely invincible and can still be pushed around by certain abilities from enemies, which usually boils down to you flying across the map, making the screen one big blur of motion to only be placed back on the spot you were at the start of the takedown. Some people can get annoyed by this, but personally I found them very funny. Well, it broke the immersion, but it gave me some good laughs out of it, so I'm not complaining there. But I am going to complain about how disappointing and wasted the dog companion was. The trailers heavily promoted that you had a mastiff, a dog companion that fought together with you, which is cool. Who doesn't want a cute dog that is equipped with a lot of bionic improvements? Unfortunately, the dog is barely used and sometimes doesn't even work, as the auto-pathing is just too clumsy. It can't keep up with your movement as you zip around the room with your grappling hook and such. And your Mastiff is not even a permanent companion, but it's on a cooldown. You can upgrade your Mastiff so it stays longer with you and the cooldown is reduced, but even then it maybe is good for 1 or 2 assists in a fight. I was really hoping that the dog would feel more like a companion. You know, the only being that you can trust in a dark, dangerous environment that is the Underhive. I was also hoping to see a connection being created between your character and the dog, but nothing like that happens. Your dog is just another ability that you can throw at your enemies from time to time, which makes it overall just very disappointing and a waste of potential. But it's not the most wasted potential in this game. That title goes to the story. As much as I love the atmosphere that is created here and enjoy the brutal gameplay that I expect in a Warhammer 40k game, it saddens me to say that it's all wasted in the end.
To me, the most important aspect in anything Warhammer 40k related is the story. And well, the story in Necromunda Hired Gun is just as non-existing as peace is in the 41st millennium. Which is a huge shame, as every other element is on point and ready to be used for the story. It's even a bit surprising that the story is so bad to non-existing, as the story basically writes itself in the setting Necromunda Hired Gun takes place in. What was even more surprising to me is that I saw people argue that brutal and gore is all that you need in a Warhammer 40k game. Yes, brutality and gore is part of the Warhammer 40k universe, and it's cool and enjoyable, but it's not what makes it Warhammer 40k, nor is what makes it interesting or fun. It are the stories and characters that are in this brutal gore setting that makes it so interesting and fun. I said at the start that the feeling of being in a hive city should be small, insignificant, and that the impact of your actions shouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But that doesn't mean having no story or characters. There was a glimmer of hope at the end of the game, as around that time some interesting things were mentioned. But you could have easily missed it, as it was very brief. Just as with the dog, your own character is basically skipped on when it comes to development. You gain a special bionic at the start, but nothing more is done with it than it giving you access to abilities. People in the Underhive would even love to steal it from you, but why it is that special is never really specified. There was only one character that had a little bit of development, and that was Khal Jericho, but had no foundation, so it might as well not exist at all. I'm not just saddened and disappointed with the experience I got from this game. I am also really annoyed, as this game has everything it needs for a good story. Instead of a cool grimdark mercenary story taking place in the 40k universe, we got a pretty good Doom clone with a Warhammer 40k skin. You can have the best atmosphere and gameplay in the world, but to make a Warhammer 40k game work for me, you need a story. Necromunda Hired Gun is a fun game. It's short with no story, but it has fun, brutal gameplay that feels very satisfying. The atmosphere is amazing and is my favorite part of the game, and despite that the game was disappointing as it lacks its most important element, I still wouldn't call this a bad game. The gameplay is really good, but it can even be better with more updates in the future, adding more polish to it. Saving the story, however, will be a difficult task and one I don't see Streumon Studio take on, but I would love to be proven wrong there. I am also a bit forgiving towards Necromunda Hired Gun, as the game's pricing is not AAA standards. Though only just a little bit forgiving, as on launch the title was on discount. Instead of the €40 standard price, it was 33, which honestly I thought was a bit more of a fairer price than the standard one. So if you seek a fun, brutal FPS that you can sink your teeth in for 10 to 15 hours, then Necromunda Hired Gun is definitely something for you. While there's good atmosphere, there's a serious lack of story, though it could be a blessing in disguise for you, as you don't need any lore knowledge of Warhammer 40k to play and enjoy this game. And that concludes my review of Necromunda Hired Gun. I hope it was useful to you. If you already played this game, see this review as a discussion starter. You might agree or disagree with me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the game down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. And with that all being said, I wish you a good day, and until next time.